The espresso machine had a sound it made just before something went wrong. A low, pressurized hiss that lasted 2 seconds, and meant you had maybe one more pull before the gasket gave out. I had learned that sound in my 3rd week at Mira & Co., and in the 14 months since I had pulled the shot early every single time, rerouted the queue, and had maintenance called before anyone's morning was ruined. That was the kind of thing I knew. Pressure thresholds. The exact moment before a small failure became a large one. I was 24 years old, and I made $9 an hour plus tips, and I knew precisely how many grams of grounds to load for a double at 6 in the morning when the grinder was still cold. That was the full inventory of what the world had decided I was worth. Mira and Cohen sat on the corner of Carver and 9th. A narrow room with good bones and unforgiving lighting that a woman named Mira had opened in 2009 and kept alive through stubbornness and a rotating pastry case. I opened 4 mornings a week. Tuesdays and Thursdays I closed. On my one full day off, I took the crosstown bus to the East Side Rehabilitation Center, where my brother Mateo had his physical therapy appointments, because he was 16 and the buses on that route ran infrequently, and our mother worked double shifts at the hospital laundry on the days he had to go. Mateo had a spinal condition, a congenital curve that had been manageable until he grew 4 inches in 14 months and wasn't anymore. The surgeon had explained it in the kind of language designed to be clear without being alarming, and had failed at both. What I understood was this. Without a corrective procedure, the curve would continue to progress. With it, he had a reasonable chance at a normal adult life. The procedure cost more than my mother and I made in 2 years combined. Our father had money. Our father had Renata. Renata Voss had married my father 3 years ago, in a ceremony I was not invited to, and had spent those years making efficient, patient use of everything she found inside his house. His assets, his social standing, his easy habit of agreeing with whoever had spoken to him last. She had 2 children of her own from a previous marriage. She had, in those 3 years, developed firm opinions about what constituted a real Voss and what didn't. Mateo and I did not qualify. My mother had left my father when I was 11, and had asked for nothing, except the right to raise her children without interference. He had agreed with the same absent compliance he gave to most things, and for years, we had understood that whatever he had was not ours and had built a life on that understanding. The apartment on Aldrin with the window that stuck in August. The tips jar I divided every Friday into rent, groceries, and the medical fund. The forms I filled out at the hospital's financial assistance window every 3 months that came back with the same answer every time. The surgical deadline was 6 weeks away. After 6 weeks, the curve would progress past the point where the corrective procedure remained viable. That was the surgeon's word, viable, delivered carefully, like something fragile placed on a table. After 6 weeks, the options narrowed in ways he was not ready to describe to us yet. I had not told Mateo about the 6 weeks. He was 16 and had enough to carry. On Friday evening, when my shift ended, I walked home through the October cold, Carver to 9th to Aldrin, 22 blocks, because the bus at that hour took longer than walking, and I had learned all the ways this city wasted your time if you let it. The wind came off the river at Breckenridge and pressed my jacket flat, and I put my head down and kept moving. $1,700 in the medical fund, $48,000 needed. The city lit itself around me and went about its evening, all of it pointed somewhere else. I was exactly the kind of person it didn't notice. That was about to change. The invitation came on a Tuesday, which was the day I closed the cafe and arrived home with coffee in my hair, and a specific kind of tiredness that lived behind the eyes rather than in the legs. My father's number. I had not changed it in my phone because changing it felt like a decision I wasn't ready to make, and because Mateo sometimes called from his number when his own battery died. The message read, "Dinner Friday. 7 p.m. Renata is cooking. Come." 3 sentences. No question mark on the last one. My father had always communicated in the grammar of a man who expected the world to organize itself around his schedule and accepted its compliance as a natural condition. I sat on the edge of my bed and read it 3 times. I had not been inside my father's house since the wedding I wasn't invited to. 3 years. We communicated through Mateo. He relayed my father's questions about my life the way a child carried messages between adults who had stopped speaking directly, and I relayed my answers back the same way. And neither of us acknowledged what we were doing because acknowledging it would have required deciding what it meant. I called my mother before I replied. She picked up on the second ring with the background noise of the laundry facility. The industrial tumble, the wet heat, the particular echo of a room full of running machines at shift's end. "He invited you to dinner," I said. A pause that had a lot of history in it. "Go," she said. "Renata will be there." "I know." Another pause, shorter this time. "Go, Anna. Ask him directly. About Mateo. Face to face. He needs to hear it from you. He hasn't returned my last 3 calls. He will sit across a table from you," she said. "He cannot not return a table." She hung up before I could argue. She had a quality, my mother, of ending conversations exactly when she had said the necessary thing, as though anything after that were waste. I replied to my father, "I'll be there." I wore the black dress I kept for job interviews and funerals. It was the only thing I owned that the Linfield district would recognize as an attempt. The hem sat at the knee, and the fabric was the kind that held its shape through a bus ride and a walk in October cold without needing attention, and I had decided in the fitting room where I bought it 2 years ago that it was the most useful piece of clothing I had ever owned. I rehearsed on the crosstown bus. Mateo's surgery has a 6-week window. The procedure costs $48,000. "I'm not asking you to give it. I'm asking you to loan it. I have a repayment plan. I have it in writing. Concrete, structured. Not a request for charity." The kind of language my father responded to when he was left with no way to decline on grounds of vagueness. I had typed the repayment schedule on Friday morning. Monthly amounts, timeline, my signature at the bottom, and printed it at the cafe before my shift. It was folded in my coat pocket in an envelope with Mateo's surgeon's letter, the procedure estimate, and the hospital's written confirmation that the 6-week window was real. I had given Renata no thought in the preparation. That was the mistake. The bus let me off 2 blocks from the house. I walked through the October dark with my hands in my coat pockets, the Linfield streets wide and stone-faced and quiet, in the way that money created quiet. Not peaceful but controlled. The noise of ordinary life held at a managed distance. I turned onto my father's street at 6:52 p.m. and stopped at the end of the front walk. 4 cars in the driveway. I counted them the way I counted anything unexpected. Without reaction, just intake, information first. My father's gray sedan. Renata's white SUV. A silver car that belonged, after a moment's consideration, to Elias Mora, my father's business partner. A man I had met twice at functions I had attended before Renata redrew the boundary of who was welcome at functions. And a 4th vehicle, black, long, the specific proportions of a car that arrived with a driver attached, parked at the far end of the drive with the engine off and no driver visible. Not a family dinner. A dinner party. I stood on the front walk in my interview dress with my repayment schedule in my coat pocket and felt the calculation shift. Renata had not called me to a family table for a quiet conversation. She had invited me to a performance. The question was only what role she had written for me, and how much of the staging I had walked into without seeing. I went to the door and rang the bell. Renata answered it herself. That was the first thing that was wrong. Renata did not answer doors. She had a housekeeper named Claudette, who had worked for my father's family since before I was born, and who knew my face, and would have opened the door with the particular warmth of a woman who had watched me grow up in that house. Renata answering the door meant she had been watching for me, positioned near the entry, which meant my arrival was a scheduled moment rather than a welcome one. She wore a cream blouse and dark trousers, and her hair was set in the style she reserved for photographs. She looked at me with the particular warmth of a woman who had prepared her face in advance and was satisfied with the preparation. "Anna," she said, "you came." "I was invited," I said. She stepped back to let me in. The hallway smelled different, something expensive and neutral from a diffuser on the console table where my grandmother's bowl of dried flowers used to be. The floors were the same floors. The light was different. Every surface I could see had been quietly, comprehensively remade into something with no memory of the people who had once moved through it without thinking. "Everyone's in the sitting room," Renata said. "Your father has been looking forward to this." I followed her down the hall. The sitting room had been redecorated. The old furniture, my grandmother's reading chair, the low table my father had bought at an estate sale the year I was born, the bookcase with the uneven third shelf, was gone. In its place, clean lines, pale upholstery, the kind of room that looked assembled rather than lived in. A room that had been made to receive people, not to hold them. My father stood near the fireplace with a glass of wine, and the expression he wore when he had been told the evening would go smoothly, and was choosing to believe it. He was 61, and looked it. Not badly, just fully, the way men looked when they had spent their lives indoors making decisions about money. He saw me, and something crossed his face before the rehearsed warmth arrived. Something that looked, for 2 seconds, like guilt. "Anna." He came forward and kissed my cheek. "You look well." "So do you," I said. Elias Mora was on the sofa with his wife, Petra, a small, precise woman who had always been kind to me at the few functions I had attended, and who looked, tonight, slightly uncertain, as though she had also been told the evening would go smoothly, and had her own reservations. She smiled at me. I smiled back. And then I looked across the room at the man standing near the window. He was watching the street below with his back partially turned. Not rudely, just with the quality of a man who occupied rooms without performing his occupancy of them. Dark suit, no tie. He held his glass loosely, as though the social function of holding something had nothing to do with drinking it. When he turned, he did it without the slight self-consciousness of a person who knows they've been observed and wants to manage the observation. He looked at me, not the way the room had looked at me when I walked in, with the quick calibrating sweep of people noting arrival. He looked at me the way people looked at things they found genuinely interesting, without deciding in advance what they expected to find. "Anna," Renata said from the doorway, with the hostess warmth she wore like a fitted coat. "This is Sebastian, a business associate of your father's." He crossed the room, held out his hand. I shook it. His grip was brief, neither demonstrative nor dismissive. His eyes were dark, and held the particular steadiness of someone who had made a habit of reading rooms quickly and saying very little about what he found. "Anna," he said. Just my name, at a neutral register, but he said it like he intended to remember it. I said something polite. I don't remember what. The room had a quality of staging. I was still mapping, and he was the one variable I hadn't anticipated, and I had learned over 24 years that unanticipated variables were where events turned. Dinner was at 7:30. Renata had made the kind of meal that communicated effort visibly. 3 courses, correct glassware, a centerpiece that had required assembly. She sat at the head of the table with my father at the other end, and arranged the rest of us between them, according to a logic I couldn't see but could feel. She placed me directly across from Elias and Petra. She placed Sebastian to my father's right, which was the position of a valued guest. She placed herself with the table's full sightline. The first course was soup. The conversation was business. The Mora firm's expansion, a property transaction my father had been involved in, the seasonal decline of something Elias managed that I didn't follow closely enough to track. Renata navigated it with the ease of a woman who had learned to produce intelligent-sounding commentary on any topic by listening at the right pitch and inserting questions that made the speaker feel heard rather than interrogated. I ate my soup and waited. At the second course, my father asked about the cafe. He called it the coffee place, which was not the insult it might have been. He simply did not retain proper nouns that weren't legally significant. I told him it was going well. Renata asked, with her warmth fully deployed, whether I was still planning to do something with the business degree I had finished 3 years ago and never used. "I'm using it," I said. "I manage the inventory system and the scheduling for 3 staff members." "Of course," she said. The warmth held. "I only meant a coffee shop, for someone with your education." "Mira is a good employer," I said. "I like the work." Petra made a small, genuine sound of agreement. Elias refilled his glass. I looked at my father. He was looking at his plate. "Now," I decided. "Papa," I said, "I'd like to talk about Mateo." The table shifted. Not visibly, no one moved, but the attention redistributed itself with the specific quality of people who had been expecting something and had decided when to receive it. I reached into my coat, which hung on my chair, and took out the envelope. Set it on the table. Not pushed toward him. Placed between my plate and my glass. Present, but not aggressive. "His surgery has a 6-week window," I said. "After that, the corrective procedure isn't viable. The cost is $48,000. I've prepared a repayment schedule. The envelope has the surgeon's documentation, the procedure estimate, and the payment plan with my signature." I kept my voice at its working register. "I'm not asking for a gift. I'm asking for a loan with terms I've agreed to in writing." My father looked at the envelope. The particular stillness of a man who had hoped the evening would not arrive at a point that required him. It was Renata who spoke. "Anna." She set her fork down. Her voice had changed. The warmth still present but thinner now, a coat worn over something colder. "This is a dinner party." "I know," I said. "I'm asking my father directly because he hasn't returned my calls." "He has been busy," she said. 6 weeks, I said. "It isn't flexible." Renata looked at me across the table with the specific expression of a woman who had decided, somewhere before this evening, what I was, and had been waiting for the right moment to say it aloud. "You come into this house," she said, "with your envelope and your schedule, and you put it on the dinner table in front of guests." Her voice was light, conversational, the lightness of someone who had practiced. "Your mother raised you to do that? To come with your hand out like... Renata." My father's voice was low. She didn't stop. Like some kind of... She paused, one precise beat. "Trash." The word landed and stayed, not loud. She had not raised her voice. That was the craft of it, the lightness, the conversational register, the tone of a woman simply noting a fact that everyone in the room had been too polite to say. Cruelty delivered at that pitch was so easily mistaken for honesty. She knew that. She had practiced it. The room did not move. That was the first thing. No one reached for a glass, shifted in a chair, cleared a throat. The specific paralysis of people who have heard something cross a line and are waiting to see if anyone else will be the one to name it first. Petra's fork was suspended halfway between her plate and her mouth, held there, forgotten. She did not set it down. She did not continue the motion. She simply stopped, like a sentence with no ending punctuation. And the color that came into her face was not embarrassment. It was the particular flush of a woman hearing something done to another woman and feeling the shape of it in her own chest. Elias looked at the centerpiece, specifically at the centerpiece. The deliberate redirection of a man who had decided, in the half-second the word took to reach him, that he was not going to be the person who looked at me right now. Not hostility, something more like the cowardice of a decent person who has chosen the wrong moment to practice it. My father looked at his plate. Not down. At it. The studied attention of a man reading something he had already read, finding it necessary to read again, finding it necessary to keep reading for as long as the air in the room required him to be somewhere other than present. Renata looked at me. She held my gaze with the warmth still fully deployed, the warmth of a woman who had said exactly what she intended to say and was waiting to see what it produced. There was nothing impulsive in her face, nothing hot. Just the quiet, settled attention of someone who had prepared for this moment and was observing its results with professional interest. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 4. The kind of silence that accumulated weight with each passing beat, pressing down on the table, on the centerpiece, on the half-lifted fork, and the studied plate, and the man who had brought me into the world and was currently reading the grain of his own porcelain. I became aware, at the edge of my vision, of movement that was not movement, a quality of stillness that was different from the stillness of the room. Sebastian had not shifted, had not looked away, had not looked at the centerpiece or his glass or any of the surfaces the rest of the table had found urgent. He was watching. Not watching Renata, watching the room. The small calibrating attention of a man cataloging what each person in a space did in the 10 seconds after something important happened. His glass rested in his hand untouched. His face showed nothing, but he was noting everything, and I understood in that moment, without knowing yet what he was or what it meant, that he was the only other person at the table who was paying full attention. I did not say anything for 3 full seconds. I counted them. 1. The fork still suspended in Petra's hand. 2. My father and his plate. 3. The warmth on Renata's face, and under it, if you knew how to look, the small, satisfied stillness of a woman who had obtained exactly what she wanted. Then I folded my napkin. Not quickly, not with force. The way I tamped grounds before a pull. Even pressure. Deliberate. Complete. I set it beside my plate, with the same care I used when I set a cup on marble. And the small sound it made in the silence was the only sound in the room. I picked up the envelope from the table. Petra set her fork down. Finally, the sound of it was very loud. "You're right," I said. "This was the wrong setting." I looked at my father. He looked up, finally, with the expression of a man watching something happen that he had told himself wouldn't happen, and had spent no time preparing to stop. 6 weeks, I said to him. Just that. I pushed my chair back and stood. I had my coat half on when Renata's hand closed around my wrist. Not gently. The grip of a woman making a point. Her fingers pressing to the bone, a proprietary claim. The physical vocabulary of someone who had decided that the exit was hers to manage. "I'm not finished," she said. The air left my lungs in one sharp, silent beat. I looked down at her hand, then up at her face. "Let go," I said. Her fingers tightened for 1 second, the second in which she was deciding whether to, and then something in the room changed. Not a sound, a quality of attention. The particular stillness that enters a room when the person with the most authority in it has shifted their focus entirely onto a single point. I did not look at Sebastian. I didn't need to. I felt it. The way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. Renata felt it too. Her eyes moved, just slightly, just once, to the end of the table. Her hand opened. I finished putting on my coat, buttoned it, put the envelope in my pocket. My wrist ached with the dull insistence of a bruise beginning to form. "Thank you for dinner," I said, to no one in particular, which was the most accurate addressee. I walked down the hall and let myself out. The October cold received me without ceremony. I got home at 9:47. Mateo was on the couch with his laptop and his headphones, which meant he had been awake since at least 8 monitoring a streaming schedule, and had not eaten since whatever our mother had left in the refrigerator before her evening shift. I checked. Half a container of rice, a plate of beans covered in plastic wrap, an apple he had not touched. I heated the rice and beans and set them on the coffee table beside him without comment, and he pulled one headphone off and looked at me with the specific attention of a 16-year-old who could read a room through peripheral vision. "How was it?" he said. "Fine," I said. He looked at me for 2 seconds longer than fine required. Then he put the headphone back and picked up his fork, which was the act of a boy who understood when his sister needed to not be asked things, and who loved her well enough to give her that. I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed and took off the interview dress and put on the clothes I wore when I needed to think. Old jeans, the gray pullover with the fraying cuff, socks that didn't match. I took the envelope out of my coat pocket and set it on the desk beside the lamp. I took the card out and set it next to the envelope. S. Desideri, a phone number, no company name, no title, no address. The specific minimalism of a card that communicated that the person carrying it had no need to explain themselves on paper. I opened my laptop and typed the name. Sebastian Desideri appeared in 7 search results on the first page. None of them were social media. 2 were articles in a regional business journal. One from 4 years ago about a commercial property acquisition. One from 2 years ago about a legal dispute settled out of court, in which his name appeared once in the 3rd paragraph. One was a mention in the Linfield Cultural Foundation's annual report, listed as a patron. One was a photograph from a charity event. He was in the background, partially turned, a glass in his hand, looking at something outside the frame. That was it. For a man who had arrived in a car like that, at a dinner like that, with the quality of presence he had, that was almost nothing. Not a ghost. The opposite of a ghost. A man who was sufficiently present in the world that he did not need to document his presence in it. I looked at the photograph. The background position was deliberate, I understood now. He existed in rooms without being recorded by them. I set my laptop on the desk and looked at my wrist. The mark was clearer in the lamplight. 4 pressure lines along the inside of my forearm where her fingers had been. Not a bruise exactly. More the ghost of one. The flush of capillaries pressed and released. It would be fully visible by morning. I took my phone and photographed it. Close, lamplight, my face outside the frame, the mark unambiguous. Not because I had a plan yet, because I had learned at some point in the last 24 years that the window for documenting physical evidence was small, and that you took it when it was there regardless of whether you knew what you were going to do with it. I saved the photograph. Then I sat at the desk and looked at the card for a long time, and did not call the number. Not yet. Calling a number I didn't understand the weight of required knowing what I was stepping into. And I did not know that yet. I opened the cafe at 6 the next morning and pulled 3 shots that all hit correctly, and had the whole queue clear by 7:15, which was a good morning by any measure, and I spent the rhythm of it. Grind, tamp, pull, plate, move, arranging what I knew into an order that held together. Renata had invited me to a dinner party, not a family table, a dinner party with witnesses. She had delivered her verdict in front of those witnesses with calculated lightness, and she had followed it with her hand on my wrist, which was either a miscalculation or a message, and Renata did not miscalculate. It was a message. You will leave when I decide you leave. But why now? 3 years of managed distance. 3 years of the boundary holding without incident. What had changed? I pulled a double and set it on the counter and thought about the envelope. I had told her nothing she hadn't already known. The surgery, the cost, the request. None of it was new information. My mother had written to my father 3 weeks ago. He hadn't responded. I had called twice. No answer. The dinner had been scheduled, I understood now, specifically because she had wanted a controlled setting for the refusal. Not a phone call she couldn't stage. A room she had arranged, witnesses she had chosen, a moment she could author. The question was why the refusal required a performance at all. A simple, no required nothing. A no delivered by a man who didn't answer his phone required nothing. A staged humiliation required effort, preparation, intent. You did not prepare a stage for something you considered beneath your attention. She was afraid of something. That was the thing sitting under the evening that I had not yet named. I was thinking about it. The 4th shot of the morning going into the portafilter, the grinder doing its job, the queue building toward the 8 o'clock surge. When my phone buzzed on the counter with a number I didn't recognize. Not his number. A different one. I picked up. Anna. A woman's voice. Older, careful. A pause before my name, as though she had been holding the phone for some time before pressing call. "It's Claudette. I met her at the Portuguese bakery on Aldrin at 9:30, during the gap between the morning surge and the 11 o'clock regulars. She had taken the crosstown bus. I could tell by the specific fatigue of someone who had transferred twice before the morning was fully established." Claudette Rios was 63 and had worked in my father's household since before I was born. She had known my mother. She had known my grandmother. She had, for as long as I could remember, moved through that house with the quiet authority of someone whose loyalty ran deeper than employment, and whose understanding of that family was institutional in the way that only decades produced. She was already at the corner table when I arrived. I ordered her coffee without asking. I already knew how she took it, and brought it to the table and sat. She had a canvas bag on her lap. Both hands rested on top of it, not gripping, just covering it, the way you covered something you had been carrying carefully for a long time and had not yet decided whether to set down. She did not begin immediately. She looked at her coffee, then at the table, then at me, with the expression of a woman measuring something. Not my trustworthiness, which she had already decided, but her own readiness. The gap between knowing you need to do something and being able to make your hands do it. "I almost didn't call," she said. "I know," I said. "I didn't, but it was the right thing to say." She looked at the canvas bag. "Your grandmother. She was not an easy woman. You know that." She said it with the warmth of someone who had loved a difficult person completely. She did not trust easily. Not the firm, not the banks, not the people your grandfather had always used. A pause. "She trusted me. I don't say that proudly. I say it because it's the reason I'm sitting here." She lifted her hands from the bag, set them on the table instead. 2 years before she died, she called me into the study. Alone. Your father was traveling. She looked at her coffee. She had a document she'd had prepared independently, not through the family firm, through a different attorney she had found herself. She gave me a copy and told me to keep it somewhere safe. A long pause. She said, and I remember exactly, not somewhere his wife would look. She didn't know Renata yet. She just knew your father. She looked up at me. She knew he was the kind of man who agreed with whoever had spoken to him last. I held my coffee with both hands and waited. Claudette reached into the bag. The movement was slow, not theatrical, but deliberate. The way you moved when you had been holding something for so long that the act of releasing it required its own separate decision. She brought out a document and set it on the table between us. She rested her fingertips on it for one more moment, as though completing a transaction with herself, and then she lifted her hand and set it in her lap. 12 pages, notarized, dated 9 years ago, the year before my grandmother died. The header read, Voss family. Discretionary trust, instrument of settlement. I looked at the beneficiary section. Page 3. My name, Mateo's name, a designated medical provision, for health and educational expenses of minor and young adult beneficiaries, subject to petition and documented need. $48,000 was not close to the ceiling of that provision. I looked up at Claudette. My father has access to this trust. He is the trustee, she said. He controls distributions. She reached back into the bag, easier this time, now that the harder thing had been done. She set a second document beside the first. This is what I printed from his home office last night. I know I shouldn't have. I needed you to see it. It was a bank statement. Not the trust account, a personal account. My father's name, Renata's name, joint. Monthly transfers from a numbered account that I did not recognize. Regular, consistent, going back 14 months. The numbered account, I said. I don't know what it is, she said. But those transfers started 3 months after she went through your grandmother's study. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who had held something difficult for longer than was comfortable, and had decided, finally, that the weight of holding it was greater than the risk of releasing it. She found the trust, and something changed. I looked at the 2 documents side by side. My grandmother's provision, my brother's name on the beneficiary line, and a pattern of transfers that had begun, with suspicious precision, after Renata had discovered those documents existed. Proof items 1 and 2. I photographed both documents on the table with my phone. Then I looked at Claudette. "Thank you," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother used to watch you at the dinner table," she said. "When you were small, she said you were the one who noticed things." She looked at her coffee. "She would want you to use it." She finished her coffee and left. I sat at the corner table of the bakery with the 2 photographs on my phone and the trust document in my hands, and thought about a woman who had gone through a dead woman's files and found a provision she couldn't remove, and had decided, instead, to make the people it was meant for small enough that no one would listen to them. I put my hand in my coat pocket, took out the card, dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Anna. Not a question. He had saved my number, which meant he had expected the call, which meant the card had been deliberate in a way I was still measuring. "I have documentation," I said. 2 documents. I need to know if what I'm looking at means what I think it means. A pause. Not hesitation. The pause of a man deciding how to move efficiently. "Where are you?" "Aldrin and Voss, the bakery." "Stay there." He arrived in 31 minutes. Not the long black car, a gray one, unremarkable, the kind of vehicle designed to be forgotten. He came in without looking around the room first, which meant he had already looked at it from outside before he entered. He sat down across from me, and I put both photographs on the table between us. The trust document and the bank statement, shot clearly, both pages fully legible. He looked at them for a long time. The same way he had looked at me in the sitting room, not quickly, not performing engagement, but with the genuine focused quality of a man for whom information was the thing he had the most respect. "The trust," he said. "Your grandmother established it. 9 years ago. My father is the trustee. My name and my brother's are on the beneficiary line with a medical provision." I kept my voice level. "He has controlled access to that provision for 9 years and has never mentioned it to me or to Mateo." "Because Renata found it," he said. "The transfers on the bank statement started 14 months ago, 3 months after she went through my grandmother's study." He looked at the statement photograph again. "The numbered account. Do you know the origin?" "No. My source didn't either." He sat back. Not away from the table. A different quality of sitting, the slight change in posture of a man who was moving from receiving information to doing something with it. "I can find the origin," he said. "Give me until Monday." "Monday is 4 days," I said. "Yes," he said. And then, "Your wrist." I had not mentioned my wrist. I had not rolled up my sleeve. He had seen it the night before in low light on a street at 8 o'clock. I pulled the cuff back. The bruise had come in fully overnight. Not livid, but clear. The 4-finger pattern unmistakable. He looked at it for 3 seconds. His expression did not change. That was the tell, I understood later. Not a flinch or a tightening jaw, but the complete and deliberate stillness of a man who had made a decision and was choosing not to attach a reaction to it where I could see it. "You photographed it," he said. "Last night." "Good." He looked up at me. "I need the original documents, not photographs. Can your source get them to you?" "She already gave me the trust document. I have it in my bag." Something shifted in his face. The slight recalibration of a man who had expected to need to ask for more and had found that the work was already done. The bank statement is the weaker link without the account origin, he said. We need to establish where those transfers come from before we can establish what they mean. We, I said. He looked at me directly. If you want to stop at documentation, that's your decision. He paused. But you came to that dinner with a repayment schedule and a surgeon's letter and your brother's name in writing. That's not someone who wants to stop at documentation. I looked at the photographs on the table. Mateo has 6 weeks, I said. Then we have 4 days for the account origin and 2 weeks to move before the window becomes the problem. He said it with the precision of a man who ran timelines the way I ran cafe queues. Not to minimize them, but to work inside them accurately. I'll need everything you have. The trust document, the photograph of your wrist, the surgeon's letter. All of it. Why do you need the wrist photograph? Because Renata touching you in that room was not incidental. He paused. She wanted you to leave quickly. Someone who leaves in distress doesn't think clearly about what she has in her coat pocket. She wanted the envelope back on the table. I thought about her hand on my wrist. The grip of a woman managing an exit. She had wanted the repayment schedule. She had wanted the surgeon's letter. She had wanted me to leave rattled and empty-handed, so that the documentation I had brought would remain in that room, in that house, under her management. I had not left it. She miscalculated, I said. She didn't account for you, he said. Flat, factual, but it landed differently than a compliment would have. More like a precise observation delivered without decoration, which meant more. I put the trust document on the table between us. He looked at it carefully, page by page, and I watched him read it the way I had watched serious people read things that mattered. Not skimming, not performing comprehension, but actually moving through the language and noting what it contained. His finger stopped once, briefly, at the bottom of page 3 where the provision ceiling was listed. The ceiling on the medical provision, he said. 80,000, I said. And Mateo's procedure costs 48. Yes. He set the page flat. Your father has been sitting on a provision that covers your brother's surgery completely for 9 years, while you worked a $9 an hour job and built a medical fund from cafe tips. He did not say it with heat. He said it the way you said a thing that needed to be said plainly, so that the person you were saying it to could stop carrying the burden of not naming it themselves. Something in my chest shifted. Very slightly. The way weight shifts when you set down something you've been holding for so long, you stopped noticing the carrying of it. Yes, I said. He put the trust document into the inside pocket of his jacket, with the care of a man handling something that had legal significance and knew it. Then he stood. Monday, he said. I'll have the account origin. Once we have that, we know what we're dealing with, whether this is a trustee mismanagement claim or something that goes further. What would further look like? I said. If those transfers are going somewhere Renata controls, he said, we're not looking at a woman who found a document and made a man forget his children. We're looking at a woman who found a document and began systematically redirecting what it was supposed to protect. He paused. That's a different matter. I stood. Put my phone in my pocket. The bakery was filling now. The 11 o'clock regulars arriving. The smell of bread coming strong from the back. The ordinary Saturday morning of a street that did not know what was sitting at the corner table. He held the door for me when we left. Outside on Aldrin, the October light was thin and direct, the kind that showed everything clearly without warmth. We stood on the pavement for a moment with the street between us and wherever we were each going. Why are you doing this? I said. Not accusatory, a genuine question. The kind you asked when you were 24 and had learned to be careful about what you walked into without understanding it. He looked at me for a moment. Not performing the consideration, actually considering. Because someone at that table should have said something last night, he said. And because what's in that document is yours. It was always yours. He paused. And because you walked out of that house with your envelope still in your pocket, and I found that more interesting than anything else in the room." He said it without warmth or performance, as a fact, presented cleanly. Then he went to the gray car and I went down Aldrin toward the apartment, and the October morning did its October things around me, and I walked through it thinking about a woman who had built a stage to make me small and had not accounted for who was in the audience. Monday came in gray and cold. I opened the cafe at 6, pulled the morning cue, clocked out at 2, and was sitting at the kitchen table with Mateo's physical therapy discharge notes and the surgeon's follow-up letter when my phone buzzed at 2:43. "Come to the office. 4 p.m. Bring everything. An address on the north side of Linfield. Not the residential streets where my father's house sat. The commercial edge, where the old warehouse district had been converted into the kind of buildings that had no signage and excellent security." I brought the trust document, the surgeon's letter, the repayment schedule, and my phone with the wrist photograph and the 2 document photographs saved in a folder I had labeled with the date, and nothing else. The building's lobby had one person at the desk, a man in his 40s who looked at me with the neutral attention of someone paid to assess rather than welcome, and an elevator that required a key card. He called upstairs. The elevator opened. The office on the 4th floor was large and spare, and had 2 long windows that looked north across the district toward the river. A desk, a conference table with 4 chairs, a wall of closed files, and 2 open laptops. No decoration that wasn't functional. He was at the conference table with a second person, a woman I hadn't met, late 30s, dark blazer, a legal pad in front of her, and the focused economy of a professional who had already read everything and was waiting to discuss it. "Anna," he said, "this is Valentina. She handles the legal analysis." Valentina nodded at me with the brisk warmth of someone for whom courtesy was real, but efficiently expressed. "Sit down," she said. "We have the account origin." I sat. She opened the laptop and turned it toward me. The numbered account from the bank statement was registered to a holding entity called Voss Asset Management, a corporate name that sounded institutional and meant nothing without the registration documents behind it. Valentina had the registration documents. She set them beside the laptop, 3 pages, notarized, filed 18 months ago with the State Commercial Registry. Director of the entity, Renata Voss. I looked at the pages, then at Valentina, then at him. "She created it 6 months before the transfer started," Valentina said. "The entity has no declared commercial activity. Its only documented income is the transfers from your father's joint account." She paused. "Over 14 months, the total transferred is $61,400. $61,000. The trust's medical provision ceiling was $80,000. I understood the mathematics of it before Valentina finished explaining it, the way you understood a recipe going wrong before the heat arrived, because you recognized the sequence. "She's been drawing down the trust provision," I said. "Not from the trust directly. She can't access that without my father's authorization on a petition. So she built a mechanism to move the equivalent value out of his personal account into an entity she controls, maintaining the trust balance on paper while rendering him functionally unable to fund a distribution." Valentina looked at me with a slight recalibration. "Yes, exactly that." "She couldn't remove us from the trust," I said. "She couldn't revoke the provision. So she made the money unavailable another way. While ensuring," Valentina said, "that if you ever petitioned formally for a distribution, your father would claim he lacked liquid assets to fund it, pointing to the joint account deficit, and the trust document would show the provision still intact. The petition would stall in paperwork while the window closed." The office held its quiet. Outside the north windows, the district went about its afternoon, and somewhere across the river, Mateo was at his physical therapy appointment being told again what 6 weeks meant. I put my hands flat on the table. "What do we do with this?" I said. He spoke for the first time since I sat down. "Valentina files a trustee breach complaint with the probate court tomorrow morning. The complaint documents 3 things: the provision's existence, the pattern of transfers that functionally depleted your father's capacity to fund it, and the timeline establishing that the depletion began after Renata accessed the trust documents. He paused. The court will freeze discretionary activity on the joint account pending review. Your father will be notified formally that a petition for distribution is pending under the medical provision. He'll tell her, I said. Yes, he said. She'll know by tomorrow evening that you found it. He looked at me steadily. Which is why we file before she can move anything else. And Mateo? I said. Valentina looked at her legal pad. The petition requests an emergency distribution under the medical provision. $48,000 to the surgical center's account directly, bypassing the joint account entirely. Given the documented timeline and the breach claim, a judge will likely expedite. She paused. We'll know within 72 hours. 72 hours. 4 days before the window started to matter. Inside the margin. I looked at the documents spread across the conference table. My grandmother's trust, the corporate registration, the transfer history, the bank statement. 9 years of a provision sitting untouched, and a woman who had spent 14 months building a quiet mechanism to make it unreachable, and a 16-year-old boy who took the crosstown bus to physical therapy twice a week without knowing any of it existed. She called me trash, I said, at the dinner table, in front of people. Neither of them said anything. The statement did not require a response. I want that in the record too, I said. The dinner, the wrist, the witnesses. Valentina looked at him. He looked at me. Petra Mora was at that table, he said. She heard it, I said. She made a sound, the kind people make when they can't stop themselves. I'll contact Elias tomorrow, he said. He owes me a professional courtesy. A pause. He'll provide Petra's corroboration. I nodded, picked up my phone and opened the photograph of my wrist and slid it across the table to Valentina. She looked at it without expression. Added it to her legal pad notes. This goes in the complaint, she said. Not as a primary claim, as character documentation. Good, I said. He walked me to the elevator at 5:20. The building had settled into its late afternoon, the lobbyman still at his desk, the city outside the glass doing its early dark, the particular quality of a Monday that had decided something. At the elevator, he stopped. You understood the account structure faster than Valentina explained it, he said. I manage inventory and scheduling for a cafe, I said. Numbers that are supposed to balance and don't. You learn to see that quickly. He looked at me for a moment with the expression I had started to recognize as something that was not professional assessment and was not yet named. When this is resolved, he said. When Mateo's surgery is scheduled and the petition is settled. He paused. I'd like to have dinner with you, not a dinner party. He said it exactly as plainly as he said everything. Just dinner. I looked at him. Ask me again when it's settled, I said. And I'll say yes. The elevator opened. I went home through the October dark, and for the first time in 6 weeks did not count the days. I already knew we were inside them. The probate court's emergency docket ran on Wednesdays. Valentina had filed Tuesday morning and called me at noon to confirm the case number. The judge, a woman named Honorable Celia Drant, who had, according to Valentina, a clean record on trust disputes and a demonstrated impatience with procedural delay, and the hearing time. Wednesday at 2:15. Wear the black dress, Valentina said. Why? Because you're 24 and a barista, and you're petitioning against a named trustee in his own home district, she said. The dress communicates seriousness without pretension. You want the judge to see the document, not the narrative Renata will try to construct. I wore the black dress. Mateo knew something was happening. He had the perceptive economy of a boy who had grown up watching adults manage things in the spaces between their sentences, and he had caught enough fragments over the past week to understand that the dinner had been more than a dinner. I had told him only that I was working on something related to his surgery, and that I needed a few more days before I had something concrete to tell him. He had looked at me with 16-year-old gravity and said, "Okay, Anna." The way he said it, no questions, complete trust, sat in my chest the entire bus ride to the courthouse. The probate court was on Remington, a wide institutional building that smelled of floor wax and old paper and the particular staleness of rooms where difficult things were decided at regular intervals. I arrived at 1:50 and found Valentina in the corridor outside the courtroom with her briefcase and a second folder she handed me as I reached her. "Your copy of the filing," she said. "The petition, the trust document, the account registration, the transfer history, and a 1-page summary of the timeline." She looked at me. "He's inside already." I had not expected that. "He comes to court?" I said. "He comes when it matters," she said, with the tone of a woman who had worked with him long enough to have stopped finding this remarkable. I went through the courtroom door. It was a small room, not a full trial court, a hearing room, with 2 tables facing a raised bench, a clerk at a side desk, and pale light from windows set high in the wall. He was at the left table with Valentina's second chair empty beside it, reading something on a folded document with the focused stillness I had come to recognize as his working posture. He wore a dark suit and looked entirely at ease in a room designed to make people feel the weight of institutional authority, which was, I was beginning to understand, a consistent quality of his presence. Not that he ignored the weight of rooms, but that he had made peace with it long before he arrived in them. He looked up when I came in, stood. Not performatively, the habitual courtesy of a man whose manners were real rather than displayed. "How are you?" he said. "Functional," I said. "Which is what I've got." Something in his expression moved, not quite a smile, but the near territory of one. He held the chair beside him. I sat. The courtroom filled in its unhurried procedural way, a clerk checking a list, another attorney at the right table who I did not recognize, and who Valentina, arriving at my other side, identified in a murmur as representing the trustee's interest. My father had sent a lawyer instead of himself. That told me something about who had made that decision, and why. At 2:12, I felt him shift slightly in the chair beside me, not toward me. A quarter turn, the adjustment of a man repositioning his attention. "Your grandmother," he said quietly. "Did you know her well?" The question surprised me by being personal. "Yes," I said. "She taught me to read contracts before I could drive. She said the 2 most important things a woman could know were how to read what she was signing and how to leave a room when she needed to." He was quiet for a moment. "She put your name in that document 9 years ago," he said. "She knew what she was doing." "She knew my father," I said. "Yes," he said. "She did." The clerk called the case at 2:15 exactly. Judge Drant was 60 and compact, and had the manner of a person who had spent decades listening to people explain why they deserved things, and had developed a precise instrument for distinguishing the ones who did. She read the petition in silence. Not skimming, reading, the way he had read the trust document in the bakery, with actual attention moving through the pages. The courtroom held its procedural quiet around her. The trustee's attorney, a man named Pharaoh, according to the nameplate he had set on his table, sat with his hands folded and the expression of someone managing the gap between what he had been briefed to argue and what he had read in the filing that morning. "The petitioner is requesting emergency distribution under Article 7 of the Voss Family Discretionary Trust," Judge Drant said, without looking up from the document. "Medical provision. $48,000 to the surgical center's account. Timeline basis. Procedure window closes in approximately 5 weeks. "That's correct, Your Honor," Valentina said. Drant looked up, looked at me. "You are the petitioning beneficiary." "Yes, Your Honor." She looked at the filing again. "The petition also documents a pattern of transfers from the trustee's personal account to a separately incorporated holding entity over a 14-month period, totaling $61,400, beginning 3 months after the trustee's spouse accessed the trust document. She set the filing flat. Counsel for the trustee. Farrow stood. Your Honor, the trustee disputes the characterization of these transfers as relevant to the petition. Personal account activity is separate from trust management, and the petition, Drant said, does not allege that the trust account was touched. It alleges that a pattern of liquid asset depletion was engineered in anticipation of this exact petition to ensure the trustee could claim financial incapacity, while the provision remained nominally intact. She looked at Farrow with the patience of a woman who had heard this particular argument in this particular form before. Does the trustee dispute the existence or the amount of the transfers? A pause. No, Your Honor. Does the trustee dispute the existence of the holding entity or its directorship? Another pause. No, Your Honor. Then what exactly, Drant said, is being disputed? Farrow sat down with the quiet of a man who had been sent to argue a position that had not survived contact with the documents. Drant made 3 notations on her copy, turned a page. The wrist photograph. Character documentation. Valentina stood. Your Honor, the petitioner attended a family dinner at the trustee's residence on Friday evening, October 17th, during which the trustee's spouse made a public statement directed at the petitioner in front of multiple witnesses and subsequently physically restrained the petitioner's departure. The photograph documents the physical contact. Drant looked at the photograph. It had been included in the filings appendix. She looked at it for exactly as long as the information required. Is this in dispute? Farrow did not stand. Noted, Drant said. She closed the filing. She looked at the room with the expression of a woman for whom the decision had been made midway through the reading and who was now managing the procedural steps required to formalize it. The petition for emergency distribution is granted. $48,000 to be transferred directly to, she consulted the page, Carver Spinal Surgical Center, account as specified in the petition filing. Transfer to be completed within 5 business days. She looked at Farrow. The court will also be scheduling a compliance hearing on the trustee's management practices. Counsel will receive the date by Friday. She set down her pen. This court, she said, to no one specifically, which meant to everyone, does not look favorably on the use of financial architecture to circumvent provisions established for the benefit of minor and young adult dependents. She stood. We're adjourned. The room stood. I sat for 2 extra seconds before I stood, because my legs required them. Beside me, he was already rising with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had expected this outcome and was moving to the next thing. Valentina was writing something on her legal pad. Then his hand came to rest briefly at the back of my chair. Not my shoulder, not a touch. The back of the chair, the lightest possible anchor, close enough that I could feel the warmth of it without contact. A small thing, deliberate. I stood. Outside in the corridor, Valentina made 3 calls in rapid succession with the focused speed of a woman who managed the gap between a court decision and its execution as a professional matter. The case number, the surgical center's account, the transfer instruction. She had clearly done this before, the machinery of follow-through already running before the courtroom door had finished closing behind us. I leaned against the corridor wall and looked at the floor wax and the institutional light and thought about Mateo on the crosstown bus. You should call him, he said. He was standing to my right with his jacket settled and his hands in his pockets and the quality of presence he had in any room. Grounded, not filling the space but occupying it in a way that felt considered. Not until the transfer is confirmed, I said. I don't want to tell him it's happening until it's happening. He looked at me with the expression I had started to catalog, the one that was not assessment and was not yet named out loud, but was accumulating meaning the way evidence accumulated, item by item, into something that could not be argued with. That's the right instinct, he said. Don't tell him until it's real. I've been telling him it would be fine for 6 weeks, I said, without being sure it would be. And now you're sure. In 5 business days, I'll be sure, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Anna. He said my name the way he always said it, with weight, not volume. What you did in that room, the filing, the documents, the trust evidence, you built that case. Claudette built it, I said. She kept the document for 9 years. You understood what it meant inside 30 seconds of reading it, he said. In a bakery at 9:30 in the morning after a night shift. He paused. That's not Claudette. That's you. I looked at him directly. You drove across the city on a Saturday to sit down with a barista's photographs. Yes, he said, without deflection. I did. The corridor held its quiet, institutional hum. Somewhere behind us, a courtroom door opened and voices spilled out briefly before settling. Valentina was still on her phone, back turned, managing the world. Dinner, I said. You said when it was settled. The transfer confirmation will come in 5 days, he said. 5 days, I said. Thursday evening, he said. Not a question. Thursday, I said. Valentina ended her call and turned around. She looked at us both with the brisk neutrality of a professional who had noted the exchange and was choosing to have no opinion about it in a corridor outside a probate courtroom. Transfer instruction is filed, she said. I'll confirm receipt by end of business tomorrow. She looked at me. The compliance hearing for the trustee will likely produce further findings. You'll need to decide in the next 2 weeks whether to pursue the character claim, the dinner, the wrist, as a separate civil matter, or let it sit as part of the compliance record. I'll think about it, I said. Don't think too long, she said. Courts have short memories for character documentation. She left down the corridor with her briefcase and her legal pad and the decisive efficiency of a woman going to her next appointment. I watched her go. Does she ever slow down? I said. Once, he said. I have seen it once. A pause that carried the very slight quality of something almost like humor, quiet and dry. She was asleep. I looked at him. He looked at me. We walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon, and for the first time since the dinner, I felt something that was not counting days or managing timelines or holding evidence carefully in a folder. Something simpler and less defended. The specific lightness of a weight set down in a room with good light. I did not name it yet. I just walked in it. The transfer confirmed on Wednesday at 4:18 p.m. Valentina sent the message in 3 words. Confirmed. Check email. The email contained the surgical center's receipt. $48,000, Voss Family Discretionary Trust, beneficiary, Mateo Voss, dated October 22nd. I was behind the espresso bar when it arrived. The queue had a 7-person depth and the grinder was running and Mira herself was restocking the pastry case at the far end of the counter. I read the email twice, put my phone in my apron pocket, and pulled the next shot. I called Mateo at the end of my shift. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he had known more than I told him for longer than I had calculated. I told him. The line went quiet for 8 full seconds. Then he said, in the voice of a 16-year-old boy trying not to cry while succeeding poorly, Anna. I know, I said. How? Abuela, I said. She left it for us. She knew. He didn't say anything else for a moment. Neither did I. We sat on either end of the phone in the specific silence of 2 people for whom the same memory had arrived simultaneously, and I let it be there without filling it. Tell Mama, he said finally. Tonight, I said, when she gets home. Thursday came in clear and cold, the first genuinely clear day in 2 weeks, the kind of October morning where the light arrived with an opinion about itself, direct and unfiltered, laying everything out without softness. I finished my shift at 3. Went home. stood in my closet for longer than I had stood in it for any professional reason, and settled, eventually, on the dark green dress I had bought for a friend's graduation dinner 2 years ago and worn once. It had a clean cut and hit at the knee, and was the kind of thing that communicated neither effort nor its absence, which was exactly what I wanted. He had told me only, 7. I'll send the address. The address arrived at 6:45. Not Linfield. The East Side, a restaurant I had not been to, but had walked past twice on the way to Mateo's therapy appointments. A narrow room with deep windows and candlelight visible through the glass, and the quality of a place that had been there long enough to stop trying to prove itself. He was already at the table when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, which I was beginning to understand was habitual and not performative, the same way his manners were real rather than displayed. The dinner was not a debriefing. That was the first thing I noticed. No folder, no legal pad, no professional distance maintained with careful topic management. He asked about Mateo's surgery date, scheduled for November 19th, and I told him, and then we talked about other things. His father, briefly, who had been in construction, and had given him a specific way of looking at buildings that he had never been able to unlearn. The cafe, the grinder, the sound it made before the gasket failed. The crosstown bus route that I knew better than the bus company's own map. He listened the way he read documents, with genuine attention that had no performance in it. Midway through the second course, he set down his fork and looked at me directly. "The compliance hearing is in 3 weeks," he said. "It will produce findings that affect your father's position as trustee." "I know," I said. "It may be difficult for him," he said. Not an apology. Information, delivered because he had decided I deserved to have it clearly. "He chose that position," I said, "for 14 months. "Yes." A pause. "I wanted to say it plainly, in case it mattered to you." I looked at him across the candlelit table, the man who had walked out of a dinner party to stand on a cold street and hold out a card, who had sat in a bakery on a Saturday with my grandmother's documents, who had stood in a courtroom corridor with his hand at the back of my chair. "It matters," I said, "but it doesn't change anything." He held my gaze for a moment. Then, quietly, "Anna." "Yes." "I'm glad you called." "I'm glad you answered," I said. Outside, the East Side went about its Thursday evening. The buses, the corner lights, the ordinary, undramatic motion of a city that did not know what had shifted inside one of its narrow, candlelit rooms. I sat inside it and felt it fully, without managing it, or counting it, or holding it at the careful distance I had kept things for 24 years of being the person no room noticed. I let it be there. Renata's small win arrived on Saturday morning. Mira came in 20 minutes before opening with her coat still on, and did not take it off. That was the first thing. In 14 months, I had never seen her open without removing her coat first. It was part of her routine, the way the case lighting and the grinder warm-up were part of her routine. A sequence she ran in the same order every time. The coat staying on meant something had interrupted the sequence before she arrived. She turned the backroom light on and looked at me. "Sit down," she said. I sat on the prep stool. She remained standing. She had the expression I had not seen on her face in 14 months of working for her. Not anger, not worry, but the specific controlled look of a woman who had received information she did not want and had spent the bus ride over deciding how to handle it. "I received a call yesterday afternoon," she said. "A woman identifying herself as a family acquaintance of yours." She paused. "She told me you had fabricated documents to make a fraudulent claim against your father's estate, that you had manipulated a household employee into accessing private family files without authorization." She paused again. The pause was doing work. She was watching me, and I understood that the watching was not theater. She was genuinely assessing. She used the word theft. The prep stool was cold under me. The grinder sat on the counter, unstarted. "She also told me," Mira continued, that she would be contacting the cafe's commercial licensing board with documentation of employee misconduct if I did not address the situation. Her voice remained flat, entirely flat. The flatness of a woman who had not yet decided which side of a line she was standing on and was not going to pretend otherwise. I want to be very clear with you, Anna. A licensing board complaint, if it goes anywhere, affects this business. Not just you, this business. She looked at me steadily. I need to know if there is anything in what she said that I should be concerned about. The back room held its silence. Somewhere in the building the heat clicked on. I thought about what I had built over 14 months in this cafe. The inventory system, the scheduling, the relationships with the suppliers, the fact that I knew the grinder's sounds better than the manual did. I thought about what a licensing inquiry would cost Mira in time and legal fees, and the specific exhaustion of defending something that should not need defending. Then I told her. The trust document, the transfer history, the holding entity, the court petition, the confirmed distribution. All of it, in order, the same way I had arranged the documents in the envelope. Not to persuade, just to account for what had happened accurately. Mira listened without interrupting. She was still standing. The coat was still on. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. She looked at the counter, then at me. Then at some middle distance between us where she appeared to be running her own calculation. Not of my honesty, I thought, but of the situation's weight and of what it was going to cost her either way. Then she took off her coat. The licensing board complaint, she said. If it comes, does your attorney handle it? The coat coming off, the sequence resuming. Yes, I said. She nodded, hung her coat on the hook, turned on the case lighting. Then we open at 7 as usual. She moved to the pastry case and began the restock with the focused efficiency of a woman who had made her decision and was moving past it. Then she stopped, turned back. Anna. Her voice had shifted, still practical, but the layer under the practical was audible now. I have run this cafe for 17 years. I have had staff. Some of them were good and some of them were not, and I know the difference by now. She looked at me directly. A woman who builds a document trail before she has any reason to think she'll need one is not a woman who steals. She turned back to the case. But next time your family situation involves potential regulatory threats to my business, tell me before a stranger does. I will, I said. I'm sorry. She put her hand on my shoulder once, briefly. Don't be sorry. Be ready. She unlocked the front door. Now pull the shots. The 7 o'clock crowd doesn't wait for family drama. I called him from the back at 7:15, between the first and second queue. She contacted my employer, I said. Fabricated misconduct claim. Threatened a licensing board complaint. A beat of silence. When? Yesterday afternoon, after the hearing date was moved up. She's trying to destabilize your financial position before the settlement meeting, he said. If you lose your job, your negotiating posture changes. She can offer less and frame it as more than you'd otherwise have. His voice was level, the level of a man who had anticipated this category of move, if not this specific form. Send me the details. Valentina will prepare a response to any licensing board inquiry, preemptive, documented, filed before the complaint arrives. A pause. This means she's frightened. I know, I said. Frightened people make mistakes, he said. She already made one, I said. She called Mira instead of filing anything official. A filing creates a record she can't control. A phone call was meant to be quiet. He was quiet for a second. Yes, he said. Exactly that. The 7 o'clock queue was at the counter. The espresso machine was ready. I have to go, I said. Anna. His voice, one register lower. She picked the wrong person to call. I put my phone in my apron pocket and went back to the floor. The settlement meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 10 a.m. Valentina had negotiated the venue, a neutral mediation suite on Remington, 3 floors above the probate court, run by a firm that provided official records of all proceedings as standard practice. The mediator was a woman named Hesse, who had been doing this work for 20 years and whose official summary would be filed with the court within 48 hours of the session's end. 2 neutral witnesses would be present by mutual agreement: Elias Mora, who had been at the dinner and whom Valentina had confirmed would attend as a professional courtesy to both parties, and a compliance officer from the probate court named Arden, who had been assigned to the case after Judge Drant's compliance hearing was scheduled. Renata had agreed to all of it. That was the thing that stayed in me on the bus ride to Remington. She had agreed to the venue, the mediator, the record, the neutral witnesses, which meant she was not trying to avoid documentation. She was planning to use it. He was waiting outside the mediation suite when I arrived at 9:48. Dark suit, no folder this time. Valentina carried everything. He looked at me when I came down the corridor and did the thing I had learned to read as his version of reassurance. He held his position, did not come forward, let me close the distance myself, which was the gesture of a man who understood the difference between supporting someone and managing them. "How are you?" he said. "I read every document in the filing again last night," I said. "Twice." "Good," he said. "She agreed to the official record," I said. He looked at me. "I know. She's going to try something inside it." "Yes," he said. "Which is why you read everything twice." He paused. "Whatever she presents, don't react to it in the room. Look at me or look at Valentina. Give us 3 seconds." I nodded. The corridor held its institutional quiet. The suite door opened and Hesse, the mediator, compact and silver-haired with the brisk authority of a woman who had managed difficult rooms for 2 decades, came out and looked at us both. "We're ready," she said. Renata was already seated. She wore cream again, a different cream, a jacket this time, the same color as the blouse from the dinner. I did not know if it was deliberate. I decided it was. She looked at me when I came in with the specific warmth she had deployed at the front door of my father's house. Practiced, full, a coat worn over cold. Beside her, Pharaoh had a briefcase open on the table. 2 other documents sat face down on the table in front of Renata's place, which was unusual. Standard mediation protocol kept all materials filed with the mediator in advance. Hesse noted the documents. "Mrs. Voss, any materials intended for this session should have been submitted by yesterday's 5 p.m. deadline." "Of course," Renata said pleasantly. "These are supplementary. I'll introduce them at the appropriate moment with the mediator's permission." Hesse's expression did not change. "All materials become part of the official record." "Naturally," Renata said, still pleasant. I sat between Valentina and him. Elias Mora sat at the side table with Arden, the compliance officer, both of them with notepads, and the specific neutrality of people whose job was to observe and document. Elias glanced at me once when I sat. Not sympathy, acknowledgement. The look of a man who had been at a dinner table 2 weeks ago and had heard a word spoken and had chosen, when the time came, to be in this room. Hesse opened the record. "Settlement mediation, Voss Family Trust, petition beneficiary Anna Voss against trustee Rodrigo Voss, with character documentation pertaining to Renata Voss. Present parties." She read the names. "This session will be transcribed and summarized in the official record filed with the Remington Probate Court within 48 hours. All statements and materials introduced become part of that record." She looked at both tables. Mrs. Valentina Arce, representing the petitioner. Mr. Pharaoh, representing the trustee. "We begin with the settlement offer." Pharaoh stood. The offer was structured. He presented it in 4 parts, reading from a prepared document with the precision of a man who had been told to be precise, because the offer was the controlled variable and everything else was not. The headline number, $60,000. The trust distribution of $48,000 already confirmed. A further payment of $12,000 from the trustee's personal account in full settlement of all claims arising from the petition and its related documentation. I looked at Valentina. She was writing. $60,000. The medical provision was covered. $12,000 on top of it. Mateo's post-surgical rehabilitation costs, which I had not included in the petition because I had not wanted to ask for more than the necessity required. It was a real offer. Which meant the amount in front of it, the conditions, was where the damage was. Pharaoh set down his document. The settlement, he said, is contingent on the petitioner's agreement to 3 conditions. He turned a page. First, withdrawal of all character documentation from the compliance filing, specifically the wrist photograph and the witness corroboration. Second, a non-disclosure agreement preventing the petitioner from discussing the trust dispute, the settlement terms, or any related family matters in any public or professional context. He paused. Third, the petitioner's voluntary resignation from the operations coordinator position recently offered by a third-party organization. The room was quiet. I looked at the table in front of me. Not at Renata. Not at Pharaoh. At the grain of the wood, which was maple, even and pale, the kind of surface that showed everything that was set on it clearly. 3 seconds. He had said 3 seconds. I counted them. Then I looked at Valentina. She was already writing, her pen moving with the controlled speed of a woman building an answer in real time. She did not look alarmed. She looked like a woman who had been handed the exact shape of the problem she had anticipated and was now measuring it. Hesse had noted all 3 conditions in the record. Her expression remained entirely neutral, which was professionally required, and which I found in this moment deeply steadying. Renata was watching me. I looked at her. She held my gaze with the warmth she had brought in, and under it, very far under it, visible only because I had now spent 2 weeks learning what she concealed and how, something that was satisfied. She believed the 3rd condition was the one that would do it. Resign from the position, lose the income, lose the proximity, lose the future being built in a gray car and a candlelit restaurant. She had not done the intelligence work to understand what I was worth to him professionally, only what he was worth to me personally, and she had built her lever from the personal angle, because that was the angle she understood. She had miscalculated. Again. I looked at him. He was looking at Pharaoh with the flat, untroubled attention of a man who had heard an offer and was noting its components. His hands were flat on the table. He was entirely still. Then he looked at me. One brief, direct look that said, "Your move." "I'm here." I looked at Valentina. "Counter," I said quietly. She stood. "The petitioner acknowledges receipt of the settlement offer," she said, in the clear, projected register she used when she was speaking for the record. "The petitioner rejects all 3 conditions." She set her pen down. "The character documentation remains in the compliance filing. The petitioner will not sign a non-disclosure agreement, and employment decisions are not within the scope of this mediation." She looked at Hesse. "We're prepared to let the compliance hearing proceed." Hesse noted it. Renata reached for the 2 face-down documents. "With the mediator's permission," she said, still pleasant, still warm, still the voice of a woman performing a duty rather than making a choice. "Supplementary materials." Hesse held up one hand. "These will be examined before introduction, Mrs. Voss. Please pass them to me." Renata passed them across. Hesse read both documents in silence. Her expression did not change, and she did not hurry. When she finished, she set them face up on the table and looked at both parties. "These materials," she said, "purport to be email correspondence between the petitioner and a third party discussing access to the trustee's home office prior to the date of the dinner." She paused. "The correspondence, if authentic, would suggest the petitioner coordinated in advance with a household employee to access privileged documents." The room held its breath. I felt it in the air, the specific quality of a trap closing, the sound of a mechanism Renata had built over the past 2 weeks while we were filing and confirming and scheduling, the counter-move she had been preparing while we were watching for her to move assets. Not the licensing board call, not the settlement conditions. This. Claudette. My hand came to rest flat on the table in front of me, pressing down slightly, the physical anchor of a woman keeping herself absolutely still. Valentina said, "Anna," quietly, which was the professional equivalent of, "Do not react yet." I did not react. He leaned forward very slightly. He looked at the documents from his side of the table. He could see them now that Hesse had set them face up. He read them the way he read everything, fully, actually, without performing the reading. Then he looked at Hesse. "May I examine the metadata on these documents?" Hesse looked at Pharaoh. Pharaoh looked at Renata. "They're email printouts," Pharaoh said. "Standard correspondence. The header data on an email printout includes the server timestamp and the sending client identifier," he said, with the flat precision of a man who was not asking for permission, so much as demonstrating that the answer did not change the question. "If these are authentic, the metadata confirms it. If they're not, the metadata shows that too." A pause. "The petitioner's email correspondence," Valentina said to Hesse, "can be verified against her account's server records. We can have the verification filed within 24 hours. She looked at Pharaoh. "Can the respondent provide the same?" Pharaoh did not answer. Renata's warmth held. It held with the specific effort of a coat buttoned too tightly, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I could see the effort of it. Hesse looked at the documents for a long moment. Then she set them aside, not in the main file, in a separate stack. "These materials are flagged for verification before they can be entered into the official record," she said. "Neither party may reference them further in this session until verification is complete." She looked at both tables. "We'll take a 10-minute recess." She stood. The room stood. In the recess corridor, I stood near the window and looked at the street below. Remington in its mid-morning motion, the court building's shadow lying across the pavement, the ordinary city going about its Thursday. He came to stand beside me, not close enough to be managed, close enough to be present. "The emails are fabricated," I said, quietly, for him only. "I know," he said. "Claudette didn't correspond with you in advance. You called her. She called you. No written trail." "She built them this week," I said, "after the hearing date moved up and the licensing board call didn't work." "Yes." He looked at the street. "She used 2 of her mistakes to build a 3rd one. The call to Mira established that she was willing to use unofficial channels. The settlement conditions revealed what she was most afraid of, the character documentation and your position with me. The fabricated emails were her attempt to discredit your key witness before the compliance hearing could examine the transfers." He paused. "They'll fail verification within 24 hours. And the official record will show she introduced fabricated documents in a mediated settlement proceeding," I said. "Yes," he said, "it will." I looked at the street for a moment longer. "She came into this room with the official record," I said, "and handed it a weapon to use against her. She believed," he said quietly, "that you were the kind of person a document could finish. She has been building that belief for 2 weeks. A pause, the smaller, more personal kind. "She was wrong about you from the beginning." The recess ended. We went back in. The email verification came back in 19 hours. Valentina forwarded the report at 7:12 a.m. on Friday. The server metadata analysis run by a digital forensics firm she used for document disputes. The sending client identifier on both fabricated emails pointed to a device registered to a Linfield address. Not Claudette's address. Not mine. The Voss family home. The emails had been composed and sent from inside Renata's own household. I read the report twice. Then I forwarded it to him with one line. 19 hours. He replied in 4 words. See you Monday. Ready. The compliance hearing was at 9 a.m. Judge Drant's courtroom had the same pale high windows and institutional quiet as the first time, but the room was fuller. The compliance officer Arden at the side table, Pharaoh at the respondent's table with a second attorney I had not seen before, and in the gallery 3 people from the probate court's oversight office whose presence Valentina had noted quietly as significant. When the court's own people attended a compliance hearing, it meant the filing had been read at a level above the assigned judge. My father was present. He sat behind Pharaoh's table in the gallery, not at it, which was the position of a man who had been told by his lawyer to be present, but not participatory. He looked older than he had at the dinner, not diminished, revised, the way a document looked when you understood it differently from how you had first read it. He did not look at Renata. She sat beside Pharaoh, cream jacket again, warmth fully deployed. She had her hands folded on the table, and her posture was entirely composed. She had lost the mediation session. She had introduced documents that had failed verification. She had less than 3 hours sleep, Valentina guessed, from the quality of her foundation application. And she had arrived in this room, looking exactly like a woman who had done nothing she could not explain. He sat beside me. His knee was half an inch from mine under the table and did not move away from it, which was all the communication the room required. Judge Drant came in at 9 exactly. The compliance hearing ran through its procedural structure. Valentina presented the trust documentation, the transfer history, the corporate registration, the timeline. Pharaoh responded with the argument that personal account transfers were private financial decisions unrelated to trust management. Drant asked 4 questions. Each one was the kind of question a judge asked when she already knew the answer and was building a record rather than seeking information. Then the forensics report. Valentina introduced it without preamble. The verification results, the device identifier, the Voss household address. She set the report's 1-page summary before Hess's filed record copy and the hearing transcript both. Pharaoh looked at the report. Then at the second attorney beside him, who had been brought, I understood now, specifically for this document. The second attorney leaned to Pharaoh and said something inaudible. Pharaoh stood. Your Honor, the respondent requests a brief recess to review this material. You've had 19 hours, Drant said. She had received the verification report at the same time we had. Standard discovery disclosure. Proceed. Pharaoh sat. Renata's warmth held, and then, in the 4 seconds of silence that followed, she did the last intelligent thing she had left. She looked at my father. Not a glance. A full, direct look. The specific look of a woman reminding a man of something he had agreed to in a private room that he had not yet delivered. A call on a debt. The human anchor she carried, the one thing she would not cross. She would not lose him in this room. She would use him here, now, in front of the court, as the final lever. My father moved. He leaned forward in the gallery seat. Your Honor? His voice was unsteady, not the voice of a man making a prepared statement. The voice of a man who had just been reminded of something and was trying to function inside the reminder. I'd like to address the court. Drant looked at him. You are not a named respondent in this proceeding. I'm the trustee, he said. And Anna's father. He paused. The gallery held the specific silence of a room deciding how to hold an unscheduled thing. I want the record to show that I am authorizing a full distribution review of the trust, everything, whatever the court finds. He looked down at his hands. I should have done it before she had to file a petition. The room held his words. Renata looked at him with an expression that lasted 1.5 seconds before she controlled it. Not warmth, not composure, but the raw and unguarded face of a woman who had called in a debt and found that the debtor had changed the terms. A person, a vow, a line she wouldn't cross, and he had crossed it. Not for her, away from her. She looked at the table. He had made his one costly mistake 2 weeks earlier, not moving fast enough when the dinner happened, not calling me that night, waiting for Monday instead of Saturday. It had cost me 2 weeks of fear and a bruise on my wrist. I had carried that. I set it down now. Drant noted the statement, filed it. Then she looked at Renata directly. "Mrs. Voss," she said, "the forensic analysis of the materials introduced in Thursday's mediation session has been filed with this court. The analysis establishes that both documents were created on a device registered to the Voss household address on October 26th, 9 days after the dinner at which you publicly characterized the petitioner in terms this court finds relevant to the character documentation." She paused. "The court will be referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential evidentiary fraud." Pharaoh's pen was still. Renata did not move. The warmth was still on her face. She was wearing it the way you wore a coat in a room that had gotten too hot for it. Not because you needed it, but because taking it off required admitting you had brought the wrong thing. And then he spoke. He had not spoken in the hearing. He was not counsel, not a filed party, and he had said nothing because nothing he said would be in the record, and the record was the point. But he had a quality of presence that rooms noticed, and when he turned his head toward Renata, the air redistributed itself the way it did when attention of a specific weight arrived somewhere. He looked at her steadily and said, quietly enough that only the immediate table heard, "You called her trash." Not a question. Not an accusation. A fact, delivered in the tone of a man placing something precisely on a surface. "At a dinner table," he continued, "in front of witnesses. A 24-year-old woman who came with a repayment schedule and a surgeon's letter and asked for what was already hers." He paused. "And then you spent 2 weeks building documents to make her into something she wasn't, because you understood that she was the only person in that room who was paying attention to what you'd built." He looked at her for one more second. "I'd like you to explain that." Renata looked at him. The warmth had no surface left to hold to. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. The trust document sat in the record. The transfer history sat in the record. The fabricated emails sat in the record with their device identifier and their household address. The compliance officer had his notes. The oversight office had their copies. Her husband had just authorized a full distribution review from a gallery seat. Every word she had said at that dinner table was sitting in the record of a courtroom that would file its summary within 48 hours. And the woman she had called trash had built the case that put it there. Drant closed the hearing at 10:57 a.m. Outside in the corridor, my father approached me alone. He had left Pharaoh's table before Renata stood and had come directly to the corridor door, which meant he had decided something before the room emptied. He looked at my face, then at my wrist, which had healed, but which he seemed to understand regardless. "The surgery," he said, "November 19th. "Yes. I'll be there," he said, "if you'll allow it." I looked at him for a moment. Not with warmth, not with coldness. With the honest assessment of a woman who had learned in the past 2 weeks how to look at things clearly without deciding in advance what she needed to find. "Ask Mateo," I said. "It's his surgery." He nodded. That was enough for now. He came to stand beside me when my father had gone, close, his shoulder half an inch from mine, the way his knee had been under the table. He did not say anything immediately. Neither did I. Below on Remington, the city was doing its ordinary late morning, the court building's traffic, the buses on the cross street, the pale October light doing its best across the stone. "Thursday," I said. "What about Thursday?" he said. "You said dinner when it was settled." I looked at him. "It's settled." He looked at me. The expression that was not assessment and had been accumulating its meaning for 2 weeks reached finally the surface of his face. Not a full smile, but its near territory, genuine and unguarded. The face of a man who had stopped managing his expression and let the room see what was in it. Thursday, he said. We walked out into the October morning together, and it was not a small thing, and neither of us pretended that it was. Tell me in the comments. What was the moment you knew Anna was going to win? The bakery, the courtroom, or the dinner table, when she folded her napkin and said nothing? Renata chose the room, the witnesses, and the word. Anna walked out with the envelope still in her pocket. That's when it was over. If this story got you, subscribe, leave a like, and hit the bell. Every week there's a new story about a woman underestimated by exactly the wrong person. The next one is already coming.